She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. In a fragile skull, I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes and goes, you know. And she's got me living in a chemical love, and I try to find the strength to know when she comes back to me again. I'm gonna come up from my hiding.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. So, the first time DNA was used in a criminal case was 1986, when police in the UK, actually Leicester, it's funny, I'll tell you about Leicester in a second, but the police in Leicester in the UK asked Dr. Alec J. Jeffries, a genetic professor at the University of Leicester, to compare the DNA of a man who had confessed to a crime against blood found at the scene. So the funny thing about Leicester, really quick before we go on, is in one of my first ever true crime videos, Madeline McCann, I pronounced the city of Leicester as Leicester, because it's kind of how it's spelled. That's how it looks to my American eyes. And to this day, even though that video is like 4 years old, people still correct my pronunciation of Leicester as if they are the first ones to do so, as if they believe that nobody else has brought this indiscretion to my attention yet. It's kind of hilarious. And I will also say that I've heard some people pronounce Leicester as like Leicester or like some kind of like, variation of that. So I wasn't totally off. Okay. But anyways, let's move on. DNA profiling can be used to solve crimes. It can be used to exonerate innocent people who've been falsely accused. It can be used to reunite family members and to identify the remains of those who are found deceased without names. And with recent advancements in DNA technology, we are seeing decades-old mysteries being solved. And just in the past year, 2 very high-profile unidentified bodies have finally been identified. For instance, the Somerton man, right? On December 1st, 1948, the body of a man was found on the beach in Somerton Park, a suburb of Adelaide, Australia. Now, for years, there was intense speculation about this man's identity, and people really thought he was like a Cold War-era spy on the run. But in July of 2022, he was finally identified as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. Now, they say it's a tentative identification, but, the people who have made the identification are pretty certain. And then going on, now we have the boy in the box. In February of 1957, the body of a little boy was found wrapped in a blanket in a cardboard box in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. For over 60 years, this poor child has simply been known as the boy in the box. But in December of 2022, he was given his name back, and now we know that he was 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born on January 13th, 1953. And he had parents, and he had siblings, and he had a whole life that we're starting to find out about, and details are starting to unravel. And when more of those details come out, I am going to do a video about Joseph. Now, these 2 cases, the Somerton man and the boy in the box, are just 2 of the most well-known mysterious cases that have been solved by DNA. But every single day, DNA helps to give someone back their name. And today, we're talking about one of those people, Opelika baby Jane Doe, whose remains were found behind an Alabama trailer park in 2012, and who went without a name and without a backstory for over a decade. But now we know her name, and we believe we know who was responsible for her tragic and premature death. And that person is still alive and can face justice. So there's a lot of good things about identifying baby Jane Doe, but it's a sad, tragic story overall. It really is. But before we dive into today's case, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. In the same way as there's been advancements in technology and DNA, them hackers on the internet out there, they be up in their game as well. But at least I know I can be safe on the internet with Surfshark VPN, and here's the best part. So can you. Surfshark secures your data with industry-leading measures by using uncrackable encryption and the most secure VPN protocols. And when I say your data, I mean, your sensitive information like credit card and banking numbers, but also your private information that you just don't want anyone else seeing, like text messages, emails, and those photos and videos that you might have on that phone of yours. Surfshark also provides IP and DNS leak protection so that nobody can find out where you're connecting from. So basically, it protects your location, and Surfshark maintains a strict no logs policy, which means they never store or save what you're doing on the internet, which a lot of internet providers do. Your internet provider might also be doing that. They probably are, because they want to sell your data, right? And I mean, I get it. It's a business. You want to sell my data, but I don't want you to sell my data, not unless I'm getting a cut. And all of that might sound complicated, and you might think, I'm not savvy. I'm not tech savvy enough to even know where to start. And honestly, that's how I felt. That's how I feel with everything, because I'm not tech savvy enough for anything, really. It's very bad. But Surfshark is so easy to use. And if I can say that, it's true. You really just have to install and run it. It's that simple. And then Surfshark will connect to the server that offers you the best speeds by default, and you're protected. And Surfshark VPN is jam-packed with features that go way beyond the basics. These features allow you to not only protect yourself and your personal information, but there's a lot of other benefits to Surfshark VPN, like having access to entertainment you might not otherwise have. I don't know if you guys know this about me. Probably some of you do, but not all of you. I'm a huge fan of British television. I love it. I love all things British, honestly. And things like BBC iPlayer are only available in the UK. It sucks. I feel really cheated. But with Surfshark VPN, I don't have to wait for new seasons of my favorite BBC shows to come to the US, or I don't have to just miss out on these shows that never make it to the US. I can watch them as soon as they are playing over the pond. By simply changing your IP address to a different country with Surfshark VPN, you can instantly gain access to their massive content library in whatever country you decide to connect in. With Surfshark VPN, you can also unlock 15 of the largest Netflix country libraries, including the US and Japan, and Surfshark has now reached coverage in 100 countries, which is huge. Best of all, and honestly, my favorite feature that makes Surfshark VPN stand out for me is the fact that one subscription allows you to install and run Surfshark on an unlimited number of devices. That's huge for me because, of course, I want myself protected, but I have a lot of people I care about. So I want to see my kids and my family protected as well. And, especially as my parents get older, I don't want them being scammed by internet con artists. So Surfshark has apps for multiple platforms, and you can install Surfshark on multiple devices. So that means you can install it on your kid's PlayStation, your kid's Xbox. If you have a young gamer you want to keep safe, use Surfshark VPN while they're playing these games where they can talk to other players like Fortnite. That way nobody can hack and find out where they live. You can put it on your mom's computer, your mom's laptop, your mom's phone, your husband or your partner's computer, laptop, iPhone, Android phone, whatever, your kids' phones, your kids' tablets, your kids' computers. Do I need to go on? It's truly unlimited. And one last thing I want to say about Surfshark VPN that makes them great is they have 24/7 amazing customer support. That ensures that you're never going to run into a problem that you have to deal with on your own, even if it's in the middle of the night, which is, I think, when a lot of us work. They're always there to help you, and they get you back on track quickly with a really friendly attitude. Surfshark has some of the best customer service I've ever encountered in my life. So you have nothing to lose. You should definitely try Surfshark VPN for yourself. If you find that it's not for you, they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, which gives you plenty of time to try it out risk-free. Right now, for a limited time, you can get 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. All you have to do is go to surfshark.deals/stephanieharlowe. This special offer makes your subscription just $2.21 a month, so you can browse securely on all of your devices. Once again, Go to surfshark.deal/stephanieharlowe for 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. What are you waiting for? Click the link in the description box. Check them out. Thank you so much to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. So in today's video, we are heading to Opelika, Alabama, a small southern city with a population of a little over 30,000 people, situated on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, 60 miles east of Montgomery. This is where baby Jane Doe Opelika lived and died at the hands of someone who seemingly brutalized her for months, if not years. Brutalized her, beat her, tortured her. On January 28, 2012, police in Opelika, Alabama responded to a 911 call about potential human remains being found in Brookhaven Trailer Park in the 1700 block of Hurst Street. Upon arrival, first responders located the partial skull of a small child between the ages of 5 and 7 in the yard of a residence, and as they investigated further, the remainder of the child's remains were found in the woods behind the trailer on the adjacent lot, about 50 to 75 feet away from the skull. Near the remains, a child's long-sleeved pink shirt was found. The shirt had heart-shaped buttons and ruffles, and it was accompanied by a bundle of curly black hair. It was believed that wild animals had dragged the skull away from the rest of the remains, and the first thing law enforcement in the area did was to check and see if there were any children reported missing in Opelika, in Alabama, in the general area, but there wasn't. Now, 58-year-old Yvonne Johnson, she claimed that her son had seen the partial skull right out in the open in her yard when he stopped by her trailer to check on her that morning. And she said, quote, "It wasn't there in the morning earlier, and it wasn't there when I went to bed, so it had to have been dragged. Something brought it there. Somebody needs to be ashamed of theirself. Somebody knows something, but nobody's saying anything." End quote. The remains of this child were sent to Quantico, Virginia for examination, with the hope of finding out more about who she was and how she had died. And it was determined that the remains belonged to a female black child between the ages of 4 and 7. But more shocking than the body of a child being dumped like garbage in the woods was the way that this specific child had lived and died. An autopsy revealed more than 15 blunt force fractures to the girl's body. There were fractures on her skull, her arms, her legs, her shoulders, and her ribs. And these fractures were in various stages of healing, meaning that this child had suffered long-term physical abuse. The girl's bones were also underdeveloped, a sign that she had been malnourished at the time of her death. And what I think is probably the worst part is she was blind in her left eye due to a fracture of her eye socket. Sergeant White of the Opelika Police Department said, quote, "Based on feedback from experts, we believe that she could not see out of her injured eye and that injury could have occurred months to a year before her death. This information is vital because we know that the injury was visible to anyone who interacted with the girl and may play a crucial role in identifying her." End quote. The little girl's death was ruled a homicide, and based on the conditions of her remains, police believed she'd been murdered sometime between the summer of 2010 and 2011. Now, shortly after the remains were found, law enforcement created and released a clay facial reconstruction of what Opelika baby Doe may have looked like in life. And pictures of this reconstruction were placed in newspapers as well as on billboards throughout Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And Opelika Police Captain Bruce DeLong said, quote, "This is a pretty significant step because now at least we have an image of what this individual may have looked like. Hopefully this reconstruction will help somebody remember something." End quote. And in fact, it did. It actually did help someone remember something.
Somebody out there hopefully will recognize this young girl.
Shortly after police released this composite of baby Jane Doe, a lady came forward with pictures of a little girl she took in the summer of 2011 while teaching Vacation Bible School at Greater Peace Baptist Church.
We do believe that this is the young lady whose remains were found in January of 2012.
The lady did not remember the child's name, but told police her left eye was deformed, possibly blind.
Back in the beginning of this investigation, physical examination of the remains, we were able to determine that this young girl had some damage to her left eye. That was information that we did not initially release to the public.
The pictures show the 4 or 5-year-old little girl in a pink shirt similar to the shirt found with the remains.
The collar and the buttons. In the photograph here, you can see a pink shirt that has a similar collar. It's hard to tell in the photographs, but there's buttons that are similar right here on the front.
So the woman who had come forward with the pictures was the teacher of this vacation Bible school, and she claimed that the little girl who was there in the summer of 2011 had been slightly unkempt in appearance. She hadn't been very clean, and she was very quiet. She kept to herself. She didn't interact with the other children very much, and she had trouble communicating on the same level as the other children. The photographs were taken during the summer of 2011, and the Greater Peace Community Church was just 3 miles away from where the remains had been found. Unfortunately, all attempts to identify the little girl through church and school records failed. Although the pictures were released to the public, they brought no new information. And for the next several years, police continued going over the evidence and looking through 15,000 case files and investigating thousands of tips. And they really took this to heart. They said that even there was some detectives who were like ready to retire, and they didn't want to retire. They didn't want to retire until baby Opelika Doe had her name. So they had been trying to use DNA to identify baby Opelika Doe for years because the law enforcement and the community in Opelika became so invested in knowing her name and giving her a proper burial. In fact, police had made 2 separate efforts over the years to identify her with DNA technology, but both times they ran into issues due to the condition of her remains, like the degraded condition of her remains, because she was left out in the open. Animals had gotten to her remains. And for a long time, they didn't really have the technology to be able to extract DNA from bones, right? Which they've started doing on a lot of like archaeological dig sites for like ancient remains. It's such a cool technology. I learned a lot about it when I went to Intermountain Forensics in Utah a couple months ago. Like, it's such a cool thing that they can now extract DNA from bones. So you don't even need flesh or things like that. And a lot of people might have the question, like, why didn't they use her hair, right? Because remember, a bundle of her hair was found near the body with that long-sleeved pink shirt. Why didn't they use her hair? Well, to do DNA testing on hair, you need the root, and it sounds like that probably wasn't the case here, that there was no root, no flesh left on this hair. Now, you can do mitochondrial DNA with the hair, but it's not going to tell you much, and you're going to need something to compare it to, like a family member to compare it to, such as we saw in the Kaylee Anthony case, where the hair that was found in Casey Anthony's trunk was tested, but because it didn't have a root, they had to do mitochondrial DNA, and they were able to match the DNA in the hair to a female member of the Anthony family, but not to Kaylee specifically. So all of the attempts to identify this baby Jane Doe with DNA, they just hadn't worked. But in January of 2022, the remains were sent to Othram Forensic Lab in Texas, and using a technique called forensic grade genome sequencing, which is a technique that Othram actually has developed and applied to many other cases, they were able to build a comprehensive genealogical profile. Now, I am really interested in this stuff, so I did some looking into the technique, and it's really awesome because forensic grade genome sequencing allows scientists to get genetic information from evidence that's unsuitable for other lab testing, other lab methods. And this includes highly degraded, contaminated, and mixed DNA. So we have a bunch of cases out there that have DNA evidence, but it's like partial DNA evidence, or it's degraded, or it's, mixed with other DNA profiles. And with this technology, with this process, they may be able to solve those cases too. And it's like, I can think off the top of my head, like 5 or 10 cases that we've covered that I would love to see this method be used on. John Benet Ramsey is one, right? So I really honestly have no idea how it works or how it does this, but I will go to this lab and find out if it's the last thing I do, because I'm very curious to know the mechanics of a method like this. And I did find an article that explained it sort of briefly. This article was written by David Middleman, who's the founder and CEO of Othram Labs, and Michael Vogan, who's the director of case management for Othram. And the article says that Othram's forensic grade genome sequencing method is based on MPS. So MPS stands for massively parallel sequencing. And I actually got to see something like this in person when Derek and I went to Intermountain Forensics in Utah, because they had a NovaSeq machine. And that machine enables the massively parallel sequencing of billions of DNA fragments. Like, it's so cool. And these machines cost like hundreds and thousands of dollars. But MPS is more robust, more accurate, and requires less input DNA, which is super important because oftentimes that's where we run into issues with DNA, because you only have a small amount of DNA to work with, and a lot of DNA testing destroys the DNA sample, which gives you maybe just one or two opportunities to work with that DNA. So there are police agencies who literally have DNA from a crime scene, but because they have such a small amount, they're waiting for DNA technology to reach a point where they can, test it and know that they're going to get something. They didn't even want to test it yet because they knew they only had a little bit, and the testing would destroy that sample. And then if the testing came back with nothing, they would have no more DNA left. So this article from Othram says, quote, "Our method combines MPS and advanced informatics to digitize genomes that otherwise fail with SNP chip and other non-sequencing methods. Genomic information is pieced together, leveraging multiple layers of quality data for every DNA position that is measured to ensure accuracy," end quote. So cool, so cool. And like I said, I still don't understand exactly how this works, but it does work because they were able to build a DNA profile for Opelika baby Jane Doe. And once they had that, the Opelika Police Department brought in Barbara Ray Venter, a genetic genealogist and biologist who is also known to have helped the police in the Golden State Killer case. And Barbara and her team at Firebird Forensics Group used the DNA profile to investigate and track down possible living relatives of this little girl. And in October of 2022, they found a living relative, as close to a living relative as you can get, baby Jane Doe's biological father. 50-year-old Lamar Vickerstaff Jr. was born and raised in Opelika, Alabama. But due to his long career in the United States Navy, he's lived in different areas of the world: Norfolk, Virginia, Honolulu, Hawaii, and Jacksonville, Florida, which is where he was in December of 2022 when detectives from Opelika visited him at the Naval Station Mayport, where he was actually stationed with the Navy at the time. They went there to tell Lamar Vickerstaff that his daughter was dead. But reportedly, he claimed to not know exactly what they were talking about, and he failed to provide law enforcement with any information about this little girl, not even her name. Now, it's unclear to me at this time whether he admitted to even having a daughter or whether he was just like, I don't have a daughter, I don't know what you're talking about. They weren't super clear about that, but he is going to go to court, so we'll find out. Now, detectives, after they talked to Lamar, they then went to see Lamar's wife, Ruth. Now, Ruth had been married to Lamar since 2006, but she also claimed to have no idea what the police were talking about. She said she didn't know Lamar's daughter, and she didn't know who the baby girl's biological mother could be. So detectives and Firebird Forensics went back to the drawing board to try and identify baby Jane Doe's biological mother, since they were getting blocked by Lamar and Ruth Vickerstaff. And in December of 2022, detectives traveled to Maryland to speak with 37-year-old Sherry Wiggins, who confirmed that she had in fact given birth to a baby girl on January 1st, 2006, in her hometown of Norfolk, Virginia. And she had named this baby girl Amore. Here's what happened. Sherry Wiggins met Lamar Vickerstaff Jr. when she was 19 and he was 35. Yuck, right? Already kind of gross. And at that time, Lamar was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia with the Navy. Sherry was born in Norfolk, Virginia. That's where she lived. And Sherry and Lamar actually met because they lived in the same apartment complex. So they, I guess, started dating, started seeing each other, and soon they began living together. And it wasn't long after that Sherry found out she was pregnant, and she said that at first Lamar seemed fine with it. Sherry said, quote, he was supportive. He was supportive along the way. He wasn't upset or anything that we got the news that I was expecting, end quote. But apparently Lamar's family was not very accepting of the relationship. They didn't like that Sherry and Lamar were living together before marriage, and they certainly didn't like that Sherry had given birth to a child out of wedlock. I guess they were okay with the fact that their 35-year-old son was dating a 19-year-old girl who basically was just a child a year or two before that, but not okay with them living together out of wedlock. And it was then, I guess when he got pressure from his family, that Lamar's behavior changed. Sherry Wiggins said, quote, "He was upset and bothered, and when he started shoving me, it was then I knew I needed to figure something out," end quote. Yes, good for Sherry. Like so many people don't see that as the initial red flag that it is. So when Amore was still very young, Sherry moved out and claims that from then on, Lamar became an absent father. And so she went to court in order to try and get child support from him. And apparently it was at that point that, things started going downhill for Sherry. When Amore was about 3 years old, Sherry Wiggins lost custody of her daughter. She said that there was a lot going on. She was dealing with some legal issues. She was going through an unstable part of her life. And after inspections of both her home and the home that Lamar lived in with his wife, Ruth, who he'd married in 2006, the same year that Amore was born, it was decided that the Vickerstaffs would get full custody of the 3-year-old girl. And at that time, Sherry was actually sort of okay with this decision because she knew she had things to work on, and she never thought that Lamar or Ruth would hurt her child. Sherry said, quote, "Lamar showed and exercised well behavior because he was supportive of my other daughter before Amore, and he was well attentive to what I needed," end quote. Sherry said that Lamar was a man of honor with a good Navy job, and his circumstances were just better than hers. And she felt that for the time being, Amore would benefit from the stability that the Vickerstaff household could provide her. And things were going well for a while, with Lamar and Ruth raising Amore and Sherry being allowed weekly visitation. But then, when Lamar was sent to Hawaii by the Navy, the Vickerstaffs, for some reason, cut off all contact, and they began blocking Sherry's ability to see or communicate with her young daughter. Sherry said that one time she called Lamar on the phone, and he answered, and he said, "Why the hell are you calling me on the phone? I'm not making special arrangements for you to see your daughter. You don't care about her, and she's okay here with us." Now, despite this, Sherry continued trying to reach out, but she was met by anger and threats each time. She told WTVM, quote, "During the course of all of this, I would still reach out. I would reach out via email over the years. They would block my email accounts. I would reach out through Facebook. They would say nasty and mean things to me if I reached out through Facebook. I called Lamar's number that I knew to be Lamar's number, and he told me that if I called again, he would block me from his phone. I would continue to call. He blocked me from his phone. When I called from another number, he said, I will block those numbers from a carrier. I will call the police on you. And that is exactly what he did." End quote. So from all of that, I just get the impression that they blocked her on all social media accounts. He blocked every number she called from. And basically there was no way that she was even able to talk to her daughter, Amore, much less see her. Now, Sherry claims that she went to court several times over the years to try and regain custody of Amore, or at the very least to have her visitation resumed. But by 2013, she was told that she had exhausted her appeals, and the only thing she could do to keep her connection with her daughter was to continue making child support payments, which she'd been doing since Lamar and Ruth took custody of Amore in 2009. Sherry said, quote, "I felt like they made me feel so bad about myself, kept trying, and the doors kept being closed. I felt like the best I could do was live out my financial obligation, that which had never stopped. I felt like one day I could tell her, I never gave up on you, and all I could do was take care of you financially, and that is what I did." End quote. Sherry said that when the police detectives arrived at her door in 2022, she thought she had a 17-year-old daughter out there somewhere, healthy and strong and living a happy and fulfilled life. And yes, she had suspected that it was possible Lamar and Ruth had turned Amore against her, filled Amore's head with lies about her mother not wanting her, but she had hoped that when Amore turned 18 and she was an adult and not under the thumb of her father, they could reconnect, and Sherry could explain everything. But Sherry will never get that chance because Amore was not out there living a happy and healthy life. In fact, it doesn't look like the poor child had a good life at all, ever, considering the state of her remains that showed she was basically someone's punching bag for an extended period of time. Now, whether that someone was Lamar Vickerstaff or his wife, Ruth Vickerstaff, or both, we don't know at this point, but they both have been arrested as of January 17th, 2023 in Jacksonville, Florida, and they will be extradited to Opelika and booked into the Lee County Detention Center so that they can face, consequences for what they did. Now, it looks like the investigators believe it was Lamar who caused Amore's death because he's been charged with felony murder while Ruth has been charged with a failure to report a missing child under Kaylee's Law. Remember, we talked about Kaylee's Law in the video about Madalena Kojakari, the 11-year-old girl who's been missing from North Carolina since November of 2022. And every state that has enacted a version of Kaylee's Law has different penalties. And in North Carolina, as we talked about with Madalena, the penalty is a Class 1 misdemeanor. But in Alabama, the failure to report a missing child is a Class C felony, punishable with up to 1 to 10 years in prison and up to a $15,000 fine. And the detectives did say, more charges could be added. So depending on what they find out, because I guarantee you, I don't know, but maybe Ruth and Lamar will turn on each other and start pointing fingers. And if Lamar makes allegations that Ruth did it or that Ruth was involved, she could still face charges in Amore's murder. Now, Sherry Wiggins was able to provide detectives with documentation that showed Lamar and his wife Ruth had been granted full custody of Amore, and they had had full custody of her since 2009. And from there, law enforcement went to all the places the vicar staffs had lived throughout the years, and they talked to schools and doctors' offices. And they determined that Amore had not been enrolled in any form of education, ever. She'd also never been brought to see a doctor or a pediatrician. Now, we do believe that it is Amore in those pictures that were taken at the Vacation Bible School just 3 miles from where her remains were found. Those pictures, again, were taken in summer of 2011. At that time, Amore would have been 5 years old. And from these pictures, it's so hard to look at them because you can clearly see that she had already suffered a fracture to her left eye from the abuse that she was forced to suffer at the hands of her father, her stepmother, or both. And it's hard to understand how anybody could see that child who literally couldn't see out of that eye and not ask, how did this happen? Now, how did Amore end up in Opelika when, her father and Ruth were, sort of living all over the place? They were in Hawaii, they were in Florida, things like that. I do believe that Amore went with them. It's hard to explain. It's possible that Lamar, was back in Alabama for a visit, or maybe he was temporarily living there again during the summer of 2011, visiting family, things like that. And maybe that's when Amore was killed, when she succumbed to her consistent abuse, an abuse that I'm sure made her short time on this earth a living hell. It's no wonder that she was quiet and kept to herself at that Bible school. It's no wonder that she wasn't communicating on the level of other children her age. She hadn't been allowed to go to school, and I'm sure there wasn't a ton of teaching happening at home. I'm sure there wasn't a ton of gentle communication or fostering communication happening at home. I'm sure the communication she was receiving at home was that of violence, shame, and resentment, which made poor little Amore feel like folding herself up and hiding in her shell. She probably felt so unloved, so unwanted. She was probably made to feel every day that she was not wanted, that she was a problem, that she was not worthy of the life that she had. It's really tragic. Now, it could be that Amore was killed in a different state and her remains were driven back to Opelika to be abandoned, to sort of make it as if, we were in Florida at this time or we were in Virginia at this time. So I don't know how she got there in Opelika. But also, it doesn't really make sense because Lamar was born in Opelika. So if his daughter is found, her remains are found, because it doesn't even appear she was buried. Maybe she was buried. Maybe he brought her there to bury her out of some form of bringing her home. I don't know. Maybe she was buried, or maybe she was just thrown into the woods. But either way, it doesn't make sense that he would do that if she hadn't been killed in Opelika, because it would tie right back to him, considering that he is her biological father and that's where he was born and raised. So I tend to believe that he was back in Opelika and he was back in Alabama at the time that she was killed. He probably sent her to that Vacation Bible School to get her out of his hair. And when she wasn't in Vacation Bible School that summer, she was being beat by her father, her stepmother, or both. And then she just eventually, her little body couldn't take it anymore and she died. and then they got rid of her, and they acted like she never existed. So a man named Xavier Powell has given us some more insight into Lamar Vickerstaff during the time that he would have been in charge of his daughter, Amore. And I don't even want to keep saying Lamar's daughter, Amore. Like, it feels wrong and dirty to say that, because this is not how a father acts. This is not how a father treats his own child. This is not how a father of any child treats any child, right? So any father would not treat a child like this. Any real man wouldn't treat a child like this. So I don't want to say that she's his daughter. It's hard to say that. But Xavier Powell basically says that he met Lamar when they were both stationed on the USS Ashland in Virginia. Xavier was there from 2007 to 2012, and he believes Lamar arrived in mid-2009. That's right when Lamar would have gotten custody of Amore. Now, Lamar was Xavier's direct supervisor, and because Xavier had grown up without a father, Lamar became like a father figure to him. And sometimes Lamar would talk about his family, including a little girl that he referred to as his grandbaby, which is apparently what he called his daughter Amore when he was talking about her with other servicemen. Xavier said, quote, "You know, we spent hours together, at least 12 hours a day together. He did show pictures and stuff like that, and he'd be like, yeah, that's my grandbaby. You know, he always sounded real proud of her," end quote. Real proud. Real proud. Xavier Powell said that Lamar didn't talk about Amore that often, and then at one point he stopped talking about her altogether. And then Lamar began spending a lot more time hanging out with Xavier and Xavier's friends and a lot less time at home. Xavier said, quote, "We were all younger. I think he was 38, 37, or 38. Me and my friend group was probably like 22, 23 years old, and he was hanging out with us a lot more than usual, drinking a lot and not going home. He spent a lot more time with us than at home with his wife, which we thought was odd. At the time, we didn't think nothing of it. We just assumed he was going through problems at home," end quote. Now, according to Xavier, this change in Lamar happened around 2011, which is when Opelika police believe Amore died. Or, I mean, let's be honest about what happened here. She didn't die. She was murdered. So hearing this, it kind of makes me wonder if, I know I don't want to give, like, Lamar a pass because he's a scumbag. He's a piece of shit. Like, no matter what happened, he's a piece of shit. Because even if you weren't directly responsible for her death, you covered it up and you didn't report her missing. So you're a piece of shit no matter what. But I wonder if, because Lamar was in the Navy and he worked, a lot, like Xavier Powell was saying, 12 hours a day sometimes, and if his wife Ruth was left with Amore, who's not her child, who maybe she didn't want, who was born the same year that Ruth married Lamar, there may have been resentment there. There may have been jealousy. There may have been a hatred. And maybe it was Ruth who was responsible for beating Amore to death. But that doesn't take away the fact that Amore had these 15 fractures, including one to her eye, her left eye, which made her blind, that had happened over a period of time because they were in different, stages of healing. Her father would have seen that at some point. Her father would have seen that she was being abused. You would hope that he would have. And her father would have known that one day he left for work and Amore was there, and then he came home and she wasn't, and then he never reported her missing or asked his wife what the hell happened. So no matter what way you cut it, they're both responsible, and they both need to go away for this. And I'm so, so, so glad that DNA technology advanced to the point where what happened to Amore came out while these two people were still alive and still able to face the music for what they did. Because so often you get these DNA profiles back and the person's already gone, or 150 million years old, like Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. And it's oh, this dude's going to go to prison for 6 months, great. He killed all these people and he's doesn't get caught until he's 150 years old. So what kind of justice is that? Not a huge amount of justice. This, at least we can see some justice be done and some time be served. I think it's just heartbreaking that all this time Sherry Wiggins was sending money to Lamar Vickerstaff to financially support a child who wasn't there. And it's not even about the money, right? Because this whole time, Sherry's been keeping her head up and holding on to the hope that someday she would have a chance to explain to her daughter why they couldn't be together for so many years. The money was just that connection where Sherry could look at Amore and be like, listen, I know maybe your dad told you, I just didn't care and I took off and, he didn't know where I was, but I was sending money every month. He knew where I was and I always tried to talk to you and see you and he wouldn't let me. And that money, that transaction would be proof to Amore that Sherry could give to show, Like, no, I loved you. I cared about you. I wanted to be there for you. And this was the only way I could be. And it proves that your dad knew where I was the whole time. So Sherry had hope that she would be able to sit across from her daughter one day and talk to her and have a relationship with her. You know, being away from your child is an absolute nightmare. We hear all of these stories where, you know, children are ripped from their mothers because their mothers have some problem like drugs or, you know, crime or something like that, but they get their lives together and they want their children back and they can't get them back. And it's a nightmare. It sounds like a complete nightmare to me. Like it is the thing that keeps me up at night. So not being able to be with your child, see your child, kiss your child, tuck them into bed every day, that's a nightmare. But you can sustain yourself on the hope that one day you will be able to see them and hold them and love them and tell them to their face, I love you. And now, you know, not only is that hope gone, but Sherry has to live with the knowledge of what her child's last days, months, and years were like. Pure torture, basically. Pure torture. That is so hard to imagine, like being a mother who thought this whole time your child was alive and you would be able to see them. Like, I just cannot get over that. It's so hard to like understand and to think about. It's really it's painful. Sherry has plans to arrange a memorial service in Opelika for the Opelika community for her daughter Amore before burying Amore in Virginia, where she was born. Sherry's also established a GoFundMe to assist with funeral arrangements and travel expenses to attend court in the future because, you know, this isn't over. Like, she is going to have to go to court. She's going to have to testify. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of expenses coming up for her that she did not expect. Now, at the time of this recording, this GoFundMe has raised about $3,000 of a $15,000 goal. Not great. So I will link it in the description box. And I'm not telling you to donate. Listen, I know everyone's going through hard financial times right now. I know everybody's got shit going on and bills they have to pay that they can't pay. Like, I understand. But I feel that, you know, if you want to and if you can, it's there for you. And I personally would like to see Amore have a nice burial. I have donated, you know, what I could. And, you know, anybody out there who can donate even a couple dollars, it would be nice, you know, if you want to do that for Amore, for nobody else, for her. So she can have a nice burial, a nice headstone with her name on it. And so that hopefully Sherry Wiggins can be in court every single day so that she can tell her truth and tell her story and put Lamar and Ruth Biggerstaff behind bars where they belong for hopefully the rest of their lives for what they did to this baby. This baby, Amore, did not deserve this. Like, understand, it's so obviously the death of a child is tragic anytime. But the fact that this poor girl suffered so much abuse at the hands of who are supposed to be trusted adults, the people who are supposed to love her, the people who are supposed to care for her, and to think of not only the physical, but the mental and emotional torture that she went through. How there were probably days where she wished she was dead because she was in so much pain and there was nobody there to hold her and kiss her and tell her it was going to be okay. She probably laid in bed with blunt force fractures and blunt force trauma and like her eye hurting her so bad, and she probably cried, and it probably hurt to cry. And she probably laid in bed by herself crying, not too loudly because she didn't want them to hear and come back in and hurt her more. But she probably laid there by herself crying, and nobody came in and wrapped their arms around her and said, it's okay, baby. It's okay. I know it hurts now, but you're going to be okay. I'm here for you. I'm here, and I'm going to be with you through this. That's what a child deserves. When they're hurt, they deserve someone to care about them and take care of them, and she didn't have that. So not only was she horribly abused, but she didn't have anybody to care for her and love her. And she deserved that. And it's just so tragic. Like, I'm glad that we have her name and I'm glad she's identified. But I find no satisfaction in it at the end of the day. Like, I will find some satisfaction when these two people pay the price that's been very delayed in them paying. So that's all we have for today. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments section. We're rounding out January. It's over. I'm glad, because January's been a rough month, I'm sure, for a lot of you. Like, January just sucks. I'm glad this month's over. We're going to February. I got a lot of great plans for videos, for content. So keep an eye on that. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed, so that you can be notified when I post a new video. Like this video if you liked it. Share this video if you think it's worth sharing. Thank you so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Battle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. It's all you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings, blood on the strings.